Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Before we dive in, I want to go through the fine print and share how we can work together. Because healing from this kind of pain takes a lot more than time. It takes the right kind of support. I work with people entangling themselves from emotionally abusive relationships, coercive control, trauma bonds, high conflict co-parenting dynamics, high conflict divorce, and if you're at the beginning of the road and wondering what divorce would look like. I offer one-on-one coaching at every stage. If you're still in the relationship, if you're unsure if it's abuse, if you know it's abuse but you're having trouble understanding what that looks like, or what to do with it, I can help you name what's happening, start setting boundaries that work for you, and figure out what you need. If you're thinking about leaving, we'll explore what that might look like in a grounded and personalized way. If you're navigating divorce or custody or co-parenting with a high conflict person, I can help you document, strategize, and stay emotionally anchored, especially when you're being gaslit, discredited, and re-traumatized by the legal system. If you've already left and you're stuck in the trauma bond, or if you've been discarded and struggling to feel like yourself again, I can help you rebuild self-trust and reconnect with your own nervous system in a way that actually feels doable. Everything I do is highly personalized. I don't walk you through a one-size-fits-all program. I listen, I reflect, and I guide you based on what you're facing right now. And some people work with me through a one-time validation call, which is offered on my website, where we zero in on one issue you're struggling with and start to untangle it together. Others work with me on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, depending on what's going on in your specific situation. And this is especially helpful when healing from emotional abuse and also in divorce. If you're curious about starting, I offer a $25 intro call, which if you listen to my older episodes, I call it a clarity call. It did used to be free, and I talk about it at a later episode, but really a lot of people were no-showing to those calls, and that was taking away time from clients that I do work one-on-one with. And so if we move forward, I just take that fee and apply it to your first session. That intro call is just for us to get on the same page so you can share what's going on for you and I can share how I might be able to help. I only take a limited number of those calls per month because one-on-one coaching is the core of my work. Out of all these offerings that I have, one-on-one coaching is the thing that I do the most, and I do it 6 days a week most of the time, 5 to 6 days a week. And so if my calendar looks full and if there's not a time that you can get in, you can email me at jessicaknightcoaching.com, and I always try and make space where I can. And I may also always have a few openings from one-on-one client reschedules. You can also explore self-paced courses and toolkits at jessicaknight.thinkific.com, including Divorcing a Narcissist 101 and the Emotional Abuse Breakthrough course. I have a documentation course and my new signature program, Unhooked, which is a private podcast and course that walks you through the full cycle of abuse, helps you map it in your relationship and how to break it and how to begin to see what it really is that you're going through. If you want ongoing support in a more flexible way, you could always check out my Substack at jessicaknight.substack.com. Each month I focus on a different theme, from trauma bonding to divorce to cluster B to sexual coercion to emotional abuse to toxic breakups. Those are just some from this year. Paid members get access to monthly deep dives, master classes, Q&As, strategy kits, and I'm working on some more group options. There is also a free option and a monthly option. So please head over to Substack. The link is in my show notes. You also can just search Jessica Knight Coaching and I'll come up. Everything that I create is meant to help. My coaching, my writing, my courses, this podcast, it's built around the one truth that you're not crazy. You are conditioned to doubt your reality, and I want to help you change that and understand what you're going through. If you like this podcast, the best thing that you can do is subscribe and rate the episode 5 stars. You can find me on my websites, emotionalabusecoach.com and high-conflict divorcecoaching.com. All of the offerings that I just mentioned are also in the show notes below. Now let's get to the episode. Hello, and thank you for being here. This episode is one that I actually recorded and planned to share on my Patreon because it is quite personal, and it also explains the trauma bond and kind of like what it was like when I was in it. I've been doing some research into my own, past and putting things together, and wanted to bring this episode, wanted to talk more about what it's like to be in a trauma bond. And I'm somebody who journals. I've always journaled. And so I know a lot of what I thought, what I felt then, not only because I remember it, because I remember it and it was so groundbreaking for me. But as I was thinking about it, I decided that I was going to share it here. I'm going to share it there because I think it's an important thing to talk through. So this all started out when I was writing a post on why I couldn't just leave. And I was writing this on Substack. And by the time that this episode comes out, there will be a written version of this on Substack it probably would have been posted in August. So if you are on my Substack, please go, and find it. It's going to be behind the paywall because it has a lot of other and more detailed personal things in it too. And so people say all the time, why didn't you just leave? And at the time, people would say it to me all the time. And it is usually asked, I think, by genuine confusion and sometimes even judgment, of course. But the answer to others seems obvious. You wake up one morning, realize you're unhappy, see the signs of abuse, and go pack all your bags. What they don't understand is that abuse doesn't look the way most people think it does. And Made, the Netflix show, shows that so clearly. It doesn't come in screaming matches, slam doors. It comes in waves. It hides. It wraps itself in memories of good moments, and then it makes you believe you could get it back if you just try harder. And when I was with my ex, I wasn't just in love, I was hooked, and he trained me to hold on through the lowest of lows because he always followed through with just enough promise to keep me believing that things would change. And the pain would cut so deep. I think this is it. I can't do this anymore. And right when I was about to leave, and there were many times where I said, I'm done, he'd come back softer, sweeter, with just enough fake promises to make me doubt my decision. And that is the trap. That's the cycle. And everybody's cycle looks different. I talk about that so much in my course I say course, but it's a private podcast on breaking the cycle of abuse. And it's called Unhooked. I've mentioned it all the time. The link's in my show notes. But when we see the cycle, when we're in it, leaving isn't just about walking away from the person, but it's about untangling the way that your mind has been wired to see their harm as love. And for a long time in my past relationship, his affection felt safe, and his constant reassurances that he would change, paired with his physical presence, made me want to move through. When he was attentive, he made me feel more seen, more than anyone else ever did. And he noticed the small details about my day, would send me long, heartfelt messages, made me feel chosen. But over time, those messages stopped feeling romantic, and I began reading them with these knots in my stomach because I'd be bracing myself for opening them. I'd ignore them for hours because I started to see that this was less about love and more about control. This was always an attempt to restart his version of the story and to smooth over harm without actually addressing the harm. And sometimes seeing his name light up on my phone sent me straight into a trauma response. I would start breathing differently, I'd have racing thoughts, a spike of anxiety, and I could not explain that to anyone who hadn't lived it. My partner texts me I get anxiety. My friend in a healthy relationship is probably going to say, what? Because woven into those moments were classic signs of trauma bonding. He'd cut me down with a cruel remark or shut me out completely with days of silence, or often explode over something so small it didn't make sense. So then I would set a boundary with him and be like, this is fucking ridiculous. And then I'd spiral, though, then into self blame, thinking if I could do this better, this wouldn't happen. And then almost always he'd return with declarations of love, tell me I was his everything and that we were meant to be. And he just wanted to get back to how we were in the beginning. It was the same script every time: harm, withdrawal, love bomb, repeat. And every repetition deepened the hook that was in me. And so when I was ready to walk away, he'd reel me back in. He'd always say things like, how could you give up on us after everything we've been through? Or, I can't believe you'd walk away from someone who loves you this much. You don't know how to love. And I'm like, this doesn't feel like love. He weaponized my empathy and my story with him, like our story of coming together as a couple, making me feel like leaving would make me the villain despite his treatment of me. Like, no matter what, I was the villain and I was ruining his entire life. And from the outside, it's so easy for people to say, leave, this is toxic. And from the inside, it feels like surviving. And when you are trauma bonded, your entire emotional system gets rewired to believe the highs mean something and the lows are your fault. And so you're not seeing the relationship as it is. You're living in a constant push-pull between love and fear, clinging to the fantasy that the loving version of them is the real one. And this is why survivors stay, not because they don't see the harm, not because they're weak, but because you've been conditioned to believe that enduring it is what you need to do to stay in love. And once that conditioning sets in, just leaving isn't an option. It's not just a decision. It's untangling your entire sense of self and having to walk into a world that no longer makes sense. And so I'm going to walk through quite a bit of why I couldn't just leave and how the trauma bond held a place in me for a really long time. And then I hope to also touch on what it took to finally break free. I am going to call this person by a different name. I'm going to call him George for the purpose of privacy. And so I was I was stuck in a cycle of the intermittent kindness that my mind interpreted as love for a long time. And I interpreted as love because when I really started to heal and unpack all of this and understand what happened, because I had a trauma bond before that was from very overt abuse, it was really hard for me to see how emotionally coercive this was, because a lot of the blame that was put on me was based on my childhood that he obviously wasn't there for. I wasn't there for his, but he also had a lot of trauma and abuse in his. But he would use the fact that he believed I didn't know how to love against me, which was not true. I have had more relationships than him. I have like good relationships with some of my past partners. The two that were abusive, I obviously don't. The ones that weren't, I have good relationships with them. He could be charming, he could be affectionate, and could make me feel like the center of his universe. But then he had this way of twisting everything on me and making me feel like I was the problem because I wasn't accepting his love or his version of love. He's literally said that before. I have text messages that say it, where his love was suffocating to me. It was enmeshment. It's not what was love for me. But the moments where things were actually fine, the moments that things were calm, it felt really good. He made me feel really seen. And after every horrible fight or remark, he'd often come back with remorse. And the thing I clung to were his promises to change. I clung to them like a lifeline because he was in therapy and he was actively seeming like he was trying to change. But then it was like within a moment, he'd like have a moment, see something, but then the minute he had to act on it, it would all go back again. And like, I often wondered, what the hell are you talking to your therapist about? Because at the beginning, it was kind of breaking through a lot of these patterns. And then as time went on, it turned into like diagnosing me and my trauma. And I was like, this is not what I signed up for. Because the cycle started to become really predictable in hindsight. He'd hurt me and then like double down on blame. I would be ready to walk away. And then he'd pull me back in with promises or fake self-awareness and trying to quote unquote hear me. And it was the classic, I call this like the hurt and rescue pattern. He would be able to sense when I was at my breaking point. And I remember after one argument, I resolved to break up and I said I was done. And he then told me to ask for anything I needed that he's not giving me. And he like basically begged me to. I did. He apologized and then agreed to the one thing I asked for, which was to have alone time with my kid without him guilting me. I wanted to go on a trip where he was supposed to come alone with her. At the time, I grabbed onto it because I was really stuck on hope and I was exhausted. Like I just needed a break. And so that hope is the glue of the trauma bond. And that trip is going to come up later. But I want to stay on the hope right now because the hope is the glue of the trauma bond. He conditioned me to expect extreme highs and lows. And that there was really no middle as the relationship went on. In the beginning, of course, there was. As time went on, absolutely not. It was either high or low, black or white. Very, very textbook BPD splitting. And psychologically, this is really powerful because it's the constant emotional whiplash. It's love one day, pain the next, create dependency in me that I didn't know was there until the relationship ended. And when I was in it, I thought I could leave. And I was addicted to that hope because that version of him felt like the real him at the time. And that if I could be better and if he could be better, I'd see that more often. And he dangled the fantasy of the early days, the honeymoon phase, all the time. Remember how amazing it was in the beginning? We can get that back. I just want to feel that again. And over time, that became really annoying. But at the time, I was like, I want that too. Like, where the hell did this go? And really, the only thing that changed was him. I was still trying to preserve the who I was. I just was getting more and more turned off by this person because it's like, this is not who he sold me on in the beginning. This is not who I fell in love with. This was somebody who needed to control everything. And he made sure I blamed myself for all the lows that we had too. He explicitly said to me at one point, I love you so much, but I'll never be with the person I got this past week, referring to a time that I was hurt and angry. And I remember when he said that, it was horrifying because it cemented the idea that I was the problem, not his behavior. That puts you in a double bind because he causes terrible pain. I react. Then he tells me my reaction was the reason he'd leave. This is how the trauma bond tightens. Because I strove to be calmer, quieter, more forgiving, so he couldn't use my anger or my sadness against me. I clung to anything to avoid setting him off. And the more blame he put on me, the more I tried to fix myself in the relationship. He even blamed me for working. And I'm like, what the hell do you expect me to do? Like, you spend money like a fucking sailor. Like, where am I? Like, no. Like, first of all, I'm probably going to be working until like I'm 90, 9 years old. But second, like, it's part of my identity. I've been a workaholic my whole life. I'm going to continue. I like it. It drives me. And so to anyone who hasn't lived it, this dynamic is so hard to fathom. And I want to stress this though. Trauma bonding isn't a sign of weakness. It's predictable psychological response to intermittent abuse and gaslighting. When somebody alternates between cruelty and kindness, punishment and reward, your brain forms a strong attachment that's hard to break, and you literally become conditioned to seek their approval. I now understand that I stayed because I was hopeful and I was empathetic, not because I was broken. I saw the good in him or the potential for good and ignored the overwhelming evidence that was there of his behavior, his bad behavior. And I was in a cycle of believing his lies and doubting my truth all the time. And so it's like, no wonder I couldn't walk away because for the longest time, I kept circling the same question. Does he truly not see what he's doing? Or does he see it and does he just not care? And the truth I've landed on is this, and this is years later, but he can't take responsibility for his actions and he likely never will because his entire identity depends on never being the bad guy. And that's the root of his narcissistic traits. People like him have to cast themselves as the hero or the victim. They're not the abuser, never. To keep that story intact, they will twist reality and rewrite the history and just bulldoze anyone who challenges their version of events, even their partner. And I've seen people do this to their kids. My mom does this to me. And he checks all the boxes of narcissistic abuse and BPD, which I've mentioned before. And if you listen to any of my podcasts on BPD, this is the person I'm referring to. So I'm going to talk more about the narcissistic traits here, but I just want to flag that a lot of the behaviors that were happening, because cluster B, they cluster together. So it's usually like sometimes we'll see a really grandiose narcissist, but often we see somebody who has a cluster of these traits in the cluster B. So narcissist, antisocial, which is sociopath, borderline, or histrionic. And when they cluster together, which most do, like you have a borderline with narcissistic traits. There's listen to a podcast once, and I think that this point is very valid. They said the one that we see the most or the one trait of all of them that you may not have some of these other traits would be like a very grandiose narcissist, never wrong. They're the best, spends all the money, totally entitled. Like we do come across that, but like I'd even argue that person is quite a sociopath because they have no regard for hurting other people, but whatever. They cluster together. And if you have somebody with a lot of borderline traits, there's a good chance it's mixed with something else. And in my case, I think it was mixed. It was like those two together, mostly with some of the others too. And so when I say he checked all the boxes here, I'm talking about a lot of these narcissistic traits. He would control the narrative, make me question my reality, refuse real accountability, admit he hurt me without admitting he was abusive. And so he would say that he hurt me, but then it would turn to something else, because admitting he hurt me would mean he would be admitting of what he actually did. And if he admitted what he actually did, it would be abuse. And his ego couldn't survive that, because when I would lay it out to him, like, would you freaking see what you're doing? He would find something else. And then it would always project onto me, my past trauma, my tone, the timing of when I brought things up. He'd do anything to avoid looking at himself. And I believe he bought into his own stories because they shielded him from shame. And a healthy person can say, I was wrong and I'm sorry. And I mean it. He couldn't, not unless he was getting something in return. And by the end, I was so exhausted and psychologically beaten down and trauma bonded that I didn't feel capable of leaving, because he had weaponized that his entire life would fall apart and I would be blamed. I could not imagine going through all of that and having to see him and run into him. And so he continued to frame everything I did as the problem, as the way of being the solution. So if I just changed literally everything about me, all the things that he loved in the beginning, this independent single mom that worked for herself and had like all, such a passion for certain work. It was like all those things were then held against me when I would be like, for the guy that was like looking at me, and because we met passing each other on the street. So for the guy that looked at me and would basically admire that I didn't need much. Like I was always walking my kid to school alone, had my headphones in. I might have looked tired. Maybe I usually always have workout clothes on because I'm going right to the gym. Like there's an independence, I think, probably about me, and a quietness too in public, which you probably wouldn't guess because I am not afraid to talk, here. And this is how I am. But like I am actually an introvert. So like I do kind of keep to myself a bit. I'm not the center of anything usually. Like I don't want to be. That he weaponized that against me later on. It was, you're not doing this, you're not doing this, you're not doing this, you're not doing this. When before I was like, I never said I was that person. And so, but for a long time, I played my part in the cycle, because taking blame and softening my reactions and doing the emotional work for both of us, like that is the only thing I could do. And so eventually I started to see the pattern, and I saw it clearly, and I saw how the charm was always followed by chaos, and how apologies weren't apologies, but just resets to keep the game going. And I saw how his love came with conditions and demands and an invisible ledger of what I owed him. And
once I started really tracking the pattern, it became impossible to ignore. He never made it more than 2 weeks without breaking the plans he swore would stop. 2 weeks was his ceiling. Every time I held the smallest boundary, not answering a flood of texts immediately, taking that alone time with my daughter. One time he kept calling me and I wouldn't answer because he said he was going to help me with something. He didn't wake up and he got mad at me that I didn't like go to his apartment and wake him up. And I'm like, you are a psycho. Like, you're an adult. And he kept calling me to basically blame me. And I just turned my phone off because I had to go do the thing that he was supposed to help me with. And I needed to focus. And that was my boundary. And then I got accused of blocking him and got yelled at. And it was just ridiculous. And so the punishment came all the time. And so after one final burst of chaos, conveniently timed during that exact time with my daughter on that trip that I asked for, that I mentioned earlier, and that he had given me when he was ready to give me anything. And it's all I asked for. I didn't want anything else. I wanted time, space with my child, and patience. I told him it was ridiculous when he was acting out and I wasn't going to spend my energy spinning into another loop. I said, this is not okay. And I basically held that boundary. Like, he then created a disaster and then expected me to caretake it. But I was done. And and that was after I had tried to leave a couple times. And then I would, basically his whole life would be thrown at me and everything I'd be ruining. And I would try and take a second and stay, but I was trauma bonded, and I am talking about this now. And I know I'm not sounding like there was deep emotion and pain, but I will say this. I was so exhausted that I could barely think thoughts. So the thought of leaving felt too much. And I knew that that was something that needed to change. And I was also injured. I had herniated disc in my back. And so my life was not the way that it looked or looks now. And I'm a very active person. So it actually really affected mental health anyway. But I wasn't going to chase him after he blew something up. And so he discarded me, essentially. That's what ended up happening. So he created a situation where he then expected me. So he's created this big mess, expecting me to caretake it and fix it. But I had a flight a day later and I didn't fix it. I didn't caretake it because that was my boundary. This was ridiculous. This shouldn't have happened. We have tools that we're using in couples therapy that you consistently throw into the trash can. I am not doing this. And I prioritize myself and my daughter, because I knew that I needed to get through my workday if I wanted to be present with her on the trip. I wasn't going to reschedule a bunch of stuff for the next week. And that's what I did. And that was too much for him that I didn't say goodbye. And I'm like, you literally caused a big fight and walked out of my apartment because I wanted to pour water before I hugged you honestly, because I was pouring the water when he walked in. And then big fight happens and he discarded me. And he did it in a way that let him play victim. So I was getting these long, rambling messages dripping with blame shifting, not self-blame, blame shifting, starting with I love you and ending with how unsafe I am for him. Textbook Darbo, deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender, wrapped in heartbreak language. And even though I knew the script, it gutted me because that is the cruelty of the cycle. Understanding them doesn't make them hurt less when they finally land. It still hurt because in my head, I thought this was going to go right back the same cycle. In a way, I thought, all right, this is another notch in the I need to leave bucket. I have a lot on this belt. This belt is running out of spaces to put more notches. But I was conditioned that I was going to get that apology. And when I didn't, my nervous system was crushed. And I was in the hotel bathroom when I read the words. I remember I had just washed my face. And then I just slid down the wall and sobbed and my hands went numb. And I just felt humiliated. And he went into full silence, full blame, didn't show up to a couples therapy session, but I knew I had to let the discard happen because this wasn't okay. I had to let the discard happen. And it was the only way that this was going to go out because there was no way he was going to let it end on my terms. And I was coming to terms with that. And I remember journaling about that, like that the only way that this is going to end is if he ends it, which at the time when I was writing it, it almost felt like he was never, ever going to do this. Like him doing this was so opposite from the way that he was behaving previously. Like I couldn't even breathe without him telling me that, that I did it right. So right after that, I was certain I had ruined like the best thing. And that is what he trained me to believe. And some part of me wanted me to beg him not to leave, not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted to be heard. Like I really wanted relief, but I didn't fight it. I didn't beg him. The discard forced me into the cold turkey withdrawal that I was struggling to take in the relationship. Because at this point, I remember talking about this with my coach, like, I think she's like, what do you need? And I said, I need a month of, like, I'm open to talking to him, but I need like a month of space. Like I need a month of like, not really, like we can go on like a date a week or something, but I need space. And like, she was like, okay, can you ask him for that? And I was like, I don't know. When I tried, it just went so bad. It was like this person that wouldn't even let me have a weekend without causing chaos now was ending the relationship in a text message. And so and thought good riddance, but I didn't. I sobbed and my body ached. And even after everything, I wanted to beg him not to leave. I just felt so broken, humiliated, and I'm convinced I'd ruined it. But now I know I just wanted to be heard. And I chose to go through the pain. And I chose to let this happen. I did not fight to get him back. And I chose to see the pattern clearly, and as clearly as I could. So I started to notice how even holding the smallest boundary set off a chain reaction. If I didn't respond to a flood of text right away because I was in a meeting or with my daughter or just didn't want to, I was always punished with hours of silence, withdrawal, and accusations. And I remember, if you have listened to me on other podcasts, I talked about this, the a million I miss you texts that I would get. Like I'd get like 16 in a day. I remember this one day, it was, I don't know, a weekend before Halloween, and I wanted to do a deep clean in my daughter's room. Like as she gets, there's like it feels like there's such a stark contrast when kids go from like baby toys to not baby toys, more like Barbies and dolls rather than like little people. And I remember I wanted to do a deep clean. I had to do it while she was with her dad because otherwise she would want to hold on and keep every single thing. And it ended up being like one of the most beautiful fall days. Like it was super hot. And all he kept doing was saying how much he misses me and how he would want to spend time with me. It was like all these ways to try and get me to not. And every time he said, I miss, like after text number 9, if I miss you, I didn't really want to say it back because the in between was all these messages making me feel bad for like choosing this choice. And truthfully, I wanted to be outside. But if I have one day to clean the room, I'm going to clean the room because I'm not going to get another day until next month. And it was a choice that I was making. And I felt so to be flooded with all of these, like, I miss you, I love you, or this or that, da, 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 I was always punished for it. He would be cold, he'd be distant, and like, he'd withdraw him and say he's not withdrawing and that I'm overthinking. And then he'd say something like, well, I guess you have something to feel guilty about. I'm like, I don't have anything to feel guilty about. I'm a single mom and I chose to clean my kid's room on a sunny Saturday. Did you have a good day? But I could predict it. It would always run in like the cold front, as I called it, would always come like after a holiday, my birthday, after a weekend I spent without him. But in the moment, I was still uncomfortable and I was gutted, but I didn't want to go back. I really just wanted him to hear me for a while, but then he never did. We never had a closure conversation. To this day, he still has my stuff if it's not thrown out, probably thrown out, and that's fine. But I began to see this pattern, though, as not only someone living it, but as an observer watching it play out, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And there was post-separation abuse, not in the sense of family court post-separation abuse, but post-separation abuse for coercive control after a relationship ends, where he's not owning anything. And if you saw this guy today and said, did you break up Like, I heard you broke up with Jessica Knight in text message. He would probably say it was her fault and she did it or something like that. But as time went on, and as I cried for months, I started to see things that I didn't let myself see so deeply. And it was like the puzzle pieces of love bombing and blame shifting, control, it all fit together. And I finally could map the cycle of abuse I'd be living in. That's the same cycle I teach in the Unhooked private podcast series, is how to map the cycle of abuse in your relationship. And once I could name it and see it, I couldn't unsee it anymore. Didn't erase the pain. I still grieved the man that he was, or that I believed he was, and replayed every fight in my head, trying to decode the logic. I wrote letters that I didn't send, and I thought about calling him. I remember one night I slept in his t-shirt. I did energy work. I did tarot readings. I cried all of the time, and I dealt with his half-assed control a lot of time when I saw him in public until I didn't, and then I became even more of the villain. So if I was like, I don't know, probably Satan before, I was like Satan 2.0 after that. But slowly, after every day of no contact and really just letting myself feel the freaking feelings, the fog began to lift, and I just kept allowing myself to see the truth, even when it was confusing. And that clarity was the beginning of getting myself back, because I could finally see that none of this had been my fault. And every time I was too sensitive or overreacting, or all these are in air quotes, or making it about me, just another way of keeping me small. It was another way of disrespecting my boundary, right? Because I was never asking for something egregious. I was never saying like, you can't do this, but like, if you promised to do X and then you didn't do X, and then that left me with this entire mess, and then I did the mess, and then I told you later I was upset that I didn't get the help. I'm not overreacting. I'm literally just telling you what happened. But eventually I silenced myself and I didn't say anything. And so every apology was a reset. It wasn't repair. It was just a reset of the cycle. And if you see yourself in my story, which I know that this trauma bond might not be presenting like yours is, but the confusion is there. I'm going to do another one about the first trauma bond, and basically like trauma bonds weren't really talked about when I went through that. So I had to like, I call it was the closest thing that I learned about was betrayal trauma, but I am working on one about that. That one had a lot of overt abuse. So it's not more difficult, but like I was so gaslit during the time. But even if you see yourself in this story, you're not crazy. You're not too sensitive. You're not just not leaving. You've been gaslit. You've been manipulated and worn down. But those tactics speak to their character, not yours. Trauma bonds are tough to break. And that is the lie that the abuser wanted you to believe. But you didn't do anything to deserve this abuse. Abuse is a choice that the abuser makes. And so no amount of the compassion or patience will reform someone who refuses to see their behavior as a problem. And leaving is hard, but living like this is harder, and it might feel like you're never going to feel okay. And sometimes people really resist the discard, or they like really cling and want to get back to it. But I will say walking away can feel like severing your limb. I've talked before, like at times I would have rather cut off my hand. Trauma bonds make it feel impossible, but once you get some distance, and this is the thing that nobody could have told me in the relationship, and I would have believed it, not one person, but once you get distance, you start to see how twisted things really were. And the fog begins to lift, and you realize how much of yourself you lost trying to appease them. And if this was helpful for you, I really do invite you to go to my Unhooked series, because it'll walk through the cycle that I described, how you can name it, see what it is, even if you're in the relationship, if you're out of the relationship, if you're struggling with the trauma bond, because like you don't need to be in something that feels so challenging. And so if anybody in your life is saying, why can't you just leave? I just want you to know they don't understand. If they're asking you that question, they don't understand. They don't understand. I understand though. And if you need support, if you're in the thick of it, you can always reach out to me for coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com. And I have validation calls that are a safe space to share your story together and have it reflected back to you without minimizing, gaslighting, or any judgment. we can map out the patterns and separate the facts from manipulation and make a plan for you that feels safe for you and your next steps. Lastly, all of August, I wrote about trauma bonds on Substack. If you go to my Substack, the link is in the show notes, you can see the entire month of posts that are up there. Everything is up there, so it doesn't go away. I never delete anything, but every month I do a theme, and trauma bonding was August, and September was beginning to heal. So if you are in this space, I highly recommend to go look through some of those things and even read some of the comments, because it's a reminder that you're not alone. I really hope that this was helpful.